Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be doing something a bit different here. Now, I've gotten a lot of criticism from my Survivor winner and player ranking videos as I've done in the past for the way that I look at the game. And here in this video, I want to explain why I look at the game the way I do. Now, this video will focus a lot on Survivor, but a lot of these topics can relate to Big Brother as well. So I have a list of topics to go over here, so let's just get started. So first topic I want to cover is something that relates to pretty much everything, and that is the importance of the social game in Survivor. And Survivor is fundamentally a social game. Now, there are people that talk about the game of Survivor like it's outwit, outplay, outlast, like they actually think that's what the game is, but really that's just a catchy tagline. That's just something that they created before the first season of the show. But in reality, the game of Survivor can only be won due to one's social game. The relationships and the respect that they garner from the jury is the way that you win the game of Survivor. You don't win the game solely on your physical game. You don't win the game by winning a challenge. No matter how many immunity wins you get throughout a season, it doesn't matter when you face off against a jury. It's the respect that the jury has for you that matters when they vote for you. And whether those immunity wins lead to respect is a matter of how you portray yourself to the jury. And the same thing with the strategic game. No matter how many strategies you come up and enact, that's not how you win the game. It can get you to the end of the game, and that is a major portion of Survivor. The way I look at the Survivor is that you need to get to the end of the game, and then you need to win the game. And the strategic game definitely helps you get to the end of the game. But again, your strategic game does not win you the jury. Your strategic game can gather you respect that ends up getting you the win from the jury. But at the end of the day, that respect that you get from the jury all relates back to the social game. And another part of this is also just that you can get to the end of the game solely based on your social game. You don't need to enact strategies to get to the end of the game. You don't need to win challenges to get to the end of the game. You just need to survive the votes to get to the end of the game. And again, when it comes down to the jury, most of the time they just vote for who they like the best. Now, obviously, I do think at the end of the day, they vote for who they respect the best, but a lot of the time, likability turns into respect. So while the physical and strategic portions of the game can get you to the end of the game, you'll always need a semblance of a social game to win over the jury. And we've seen this over and over and over again in the history of Survivor. I mean, there's so many players that win immunity challenge after immunity challenge and get to the end and then still don't have enough respect from the jury to win a jury vote. We have Brad Culpepper lost to Sarah Lucina. We have Christy Hoffbeck lost to Ben Driebergen. I mean, there's so many examples of people who won a lot of challenges, but they still don't garner the respect of the jury. And same thing with strategic moves. We have Russell Hantz, one of the most strategic players in the history of the show, lose out to Natalie White, a very social player who barely had a strategic bone in her body. Now, while I'm also at it, I might as well talk about how the social and strategic games of Survivor are so interconnected, as one cannot enact a strategic game without the use of social game elements. A person cannot win Survivor on their own. A person cannot flip a vote on their own. They need other people to vote with them. Now, the most reliable road to the end of the game is by being on the same side of the vote as the majority of the tribe. And the strategic game is the use of strategy to further increase the probability of you winning the game. And these strategic moves cannot be enacted without the ability to get people to go along with your plans. So while I think there are people who know the game well enough to know what their optimal move is within the game of Survivor, it means nothing without the ability to enact those moves. I mean, having a strategic game is pointless if you don't have a strong enough social game to get what you want out of these other players. And it's because of that, for me, when evaluating a player, a social player is more impressive to me than someone that is solely reliant on challenges or strategy. Now, obviously, optimally, someone would have the ability to do all three, or at least the social and strategic elements of the game. But someone without a semblance of a social game will never actually win the game. Now, I want to directly address some points of contention that I've seen in my winner ranking videos. I always get the question of, why do you discredit immunity wins? They're part of the game. And I'm like, well, no shit. Obviously, they're part of the game, but they are a part of the game that I respect less than the social and strategic portions of the game. Now, I've already explained why the physical portion of the game isn't that important to me, especially, again, we've had examples of people who've solely won immunity challenges and didn't win the game at the end because they didn't have the respect from the jury. But I overall just don't have a problem with someone winning a challenge. My problem is if someone needs to win a challenge. Again, if someone wins 5 immunities, cool. Good on you. But if you need those 5 immunity wins to stay in the game, that's a massive flaw on your end. I mean, something like Colby Donaldson won 5 immunities in Survivor Australian Outback, but he didn't need those immunity wins. He would have been safe for all but that final 3 round without an immunity win anyway. So that's something I don't discredit. But then we get someone like a Brad Culpepper who needed immunity wins, and if he didn't win immunities, he would have been taken out. That's a massive flaw on his end. And the reason why I consider that a knock against you is the goal of the game is, again, to get to the end of the game and then win. I already said you win the game with a social game, not with a physical game. So fundamentally, the challenges are just a way for you to get to the end. Obviously, the way you get to the end of the game is by not getting voted out. I mean, unless there's redemption or edge and whatever. We'll talk about that later. And the most secure way of not getting voted out is by staying in the majority of the tribe, as in that case, you can't be voted out unless there's an idol, but we'll talk about that later as well. But in most scenarios, being in the majority of the tribe is enough. It's the most probable way of getting to the end. Now, needing an immunity win is a much more high variance way of getting to the end. Whether or not you win immunity is largely reliant on what the immunity challenge is. And what the immunity challenge is largely due to luck. I mean, it's production that outlines what the immunity challenges are going to be. The players don't. When it comes to staying in the majority and voting correctly, that is due to the players on the beach. With immunity wins, you need luck that production has selected a challenge that caters to your strengths more so than the people that you're up against. I mean, you can be an Ozzy or a Joe, someone that dominates obstacle courses and does well in puzzles, but then you can get a memory immunity challenge or some motion or just anything that caters towards a completely different skill set, and then you're completely screwed. And even if a challenge does cater towards them, there's also variance in terms of who they are competing against, which is a major factor in deciding who wins the challenges as well. And also there just might be other circumstances that would harm their performance on that one day. I mean, we can look at Joe from Survivor Cambodia, where he loses immunity because of dehydration and passes out. That's the level of variance that I'm talking about. And now in terms of my winner rankings, while I do consider needing an immunity win as a knock against someone's game, needing one immunity win isn't that major of a deal for me. I mean, yes, it would probably bump you a little bit lower behind someone that never needed an immunity win, but it's not that major of a knock. I mean, it's mostly when you have someone like a Mike Holloway or a Terry Dietz who needs to win out from very early on that I consider very problematic. And that would knock you pretty much to the bottom tier of my winner rankings, no matter how good your first half of the game was. And while we're at it, I might as well talk about idols as well. And I've had some trouble reconciling with idols in the game, as they again go against what Survivor fundamentally started as. Not getting the majority of the votes was the way to get to the end of the game, but with the use of idols, you can not get to the end of the game despite having the majority of the votes the entire way through. Like immunity wins, if you need an idol to survive, I do consider that a knock against your game. And to be honest, a bigger knock, as immunity wins are fundamentally part of the game. I mean, they are something that have always been there. But for me, idols are even more luck-centric than challenges are. I mean, with idols, there's no guarantee that there's going to be an idol in play and available to be found in a round that you need it. The availability of idols is determined on how many idols are already found, obviously, and how many were played by the cast, and also just how many idols production decides to put into play. I consider needing an idol play a complete deal breaker, as it's such a higher level of variance mixed in with the fact that you got the majority of the votes. You fundamentally lost the game. That's the one thing you try to avoid within the game. Now, there are exceptions. There are times where people try to draw the votes onto them so that they can play the idol correctly. I think that is an exception. But in most other scenarios, most times when an idol is played correctly, I do consider that a knock against your game. Again, for me, it's not different from someone getting voted out and coming back into the game through Redemption Island or The Edge. I mean, it's a very similar aspect. You fundamentally lost the game, but you're still in the game. With that said, I do love when people use idols on other people. Like Natalie Anderson playing her idol to take out Baylor is one of my all-time favorite moves, as it shows Natalie's strategic ability in using a tool that she found to benefit her game, but not needing it to survive in the game. Now, I will say that if someone else plays an idol on you successfully, I consider that an even bigger knock than you playing the idol successfully on yourself, because this adds another layer of variance to it where you need someone else to have found an idol and be willing to play that idol on you as well. Where Natalie plays the idol on Jacqueline, like that had nothing to do with Jacqueline. Like Jacqueline did absolutely nothing to actually garner the idol being played on her. Natalie just found it to be a better situation for her if Jacqueline stayed in the game. So I consider that a major knock against Jacqueline, and people hated my ranking of Parvati on my runner-up rankings, but that's the exact reason why I have her in the position that she is. She's not even that low. I mean, she's still like way in the upper half, but she was saved by Russell playing an idol on her, and then getting really lucked out in Tyson messing up his own vote. Because if that had not happened, Tyson and Boston Rob would have kept control of that tribe and she would have been taken out next anyway. But I will say that I do think it is the job of a modern day player to avoid idols and to not be targeted by the minority as well as the majority due to the way that the game has changed. At this point, if you were to be voted out, no matter how that was the case, I do think it is a flaw in your game that you made yourself a target by anyone at this point in Survivor, knowing that idols and other different types of advantages are in play. Now, obviously, the worst of the worst for me is obviously being voted out of the game and returning through Edge or Redemption or to Outcast or whatever twist that they're going to put in there that has a similar function. If you're voted out of the game, you lost. You fundamentally lost the game, and no matter what you do after that, you fundamentally lost already against people that didn't fundamentally lose. I mean, obviously, if you're in the final 3 with all people that got voted out somehow, then sure, whatever, one of you has the win. But if you're against people that didn't lose, then you shouldn't win in my eyes. Obviously Chris Underwood won. There's that. And I do find what Chris Underwood did more impressive than what like Gavin did. But I still would have voted for Gavin just because Gavin did not fundamentally lose the game. And same thing goes with people like Rick Devens, Ozzy in South Pacific, Andrew in Redemption Island, Lil. I mean, there are people that got to the end or came very close to getting to the end that I wouldn't have given them my votes in any scenario because they already lost the game. They got voted out of the game. They already failed at the basic premise of what Survivor is. Now let's talk about the concept of dominance in Survivor, which is the main criteria I use to rank my winners. And I've gotten a lot of backlash on this as well. But the reason I use dominance as the metric for ranking winners is because fundamentally every winner's game is different. They compete against a different group of people under different circumstances. And because of that, most metrics of ranking people is arbitrary. I mean, filled with bias. So I decided to go with the most fact-based way of ranking the winners, and that is through dominance. Through the sheer fact of, did they control the game? Did they control the outcome of that round or not? Were they in the majority or not? Were they positioned at the top of their alliance or the bottom? It's much easier to assess someone's game this way. And for me, the games I'm the most impressed to watch are the dominant wins of the game anyway. I mean, watching Kim Spradlin walk through One World with no issues is much more impressive to me than watching a Chris Doherty, someone who actively did things to get himself in the minority, and yes, he was able to overcome that, but in a perfect game of Survivor, he wouldn't have been in that position to begin with. Being in the minority in Survivor, outside of obviously being tribe swapped, means that you fundamentally did something wrong in the game, considering again, the most secure way of getting to the end of the game is through being in the majority. And by not being in the majority through means that aren't completely random, means that you did something fundamentally wrong, where that means that you did not maintain the correct relationships, meaning that you were not good enough socially, meaning you did not make the optimal moves, or even that you didn't manage your threat level well enough. These are mistakes that can be avoided, and because of that, I do consider these things important in ranking a winner's game. And since I just mentioned this, I might as well expand on it as well. Managing your threat level is a massive part of Survivor. A truly great Survivor player is someone that can easily win at the end of the game, but not someone detected as such a massive threat. I mean, someone like Tommy did a masterful job at this. Obviously, there is the evolution of using meat shields to further reduce your threat level, allowing you to get further into the game without being the main target. But Tommy did it in a way that without being the main target, because he had Elaine there, he had Janet there, and he had Lauren there, all perceived bigger threats than him. That shows his ability to lower his threat level effectively. Unlike players like Christian or Ben or Rick Devens or Terry Dietz, who are likely winners if they get to the end. I mean, obviously Ben did win, and then Terry and Rick almost did win through the use of idols or challenges, which again, I find as a negative aspect of one's game. They all fundamentally failed at managing their threat level, and again, the goal of Survivor is to get to the end and to win, and they fundamentally failed at the optimal path to get to the end. Now, another thing I've been getting a lot of complaints about, largely in my runner-up ranking, is why do I rate someone that is a GOAT over someone that was an underdog? And I think I've mostly explained this already, but let's go through it again. Again, being an underdog for me in Survivor means that you've done something fundamentally wrong within the game. A big example of this that comes to mind is Kelly Wentworth in Cambodia. I mean, while she is someone with a lot of acumen for the game, and I think she's someone that I was impressed that she survived as long as she did, I consider the Cambodia game pretty horrible. She's part of the majority for the first vote, but by the time the Shireen vote, she's already on the outs. She remains on the outs for the rest of the pre-merge, mostly due to bad swaps, but by the time she gets to the merge, she's in the minority with Cass, Sierra, and Abby. And had the player idle correctly to vote out Savage, but as I already explained, idle plays are not that impressive to me. Then she's lumped into the Wigglesworth vote. I mean, you can give her some credit for a Fishback vote, but from that point on, she's on the outs, where her alliance members are taken out one by one by one, and she needs to win out from the final 6 on to get to the end, and she falters at the final 4. I mean, again, this is the perfect example of an underdog game, but as I mentioned, she was rarely a majority of the vote. Again, the most secure way of getting to the end, which is what a major portion of what this game is. So now I bring up someone like a Philip Shepard, who I still think played a terrible game. I have him pretty low ranked on my runner-up ranking. He did have very little agency in the game. He didn't have any control over most of the votes. I mean, Boston Rob did most of the strategy for him, and he was terrible socially. But he was in the majority. He was doing the thing that was the most optimal path for him to get to the end of the game. He was part of the group that voted people off. And again, I think that is one of the most important aspects of Survivor, as it gives you the highest likelihood of making it to the end of the game. Now, obviously, Philip couldn't win a jury vote, so this is an extreme example of that. But I would still consider a person in the majority, no matter how much of a goat that they are, as having played a better game than someone who is never in the majority. And it all comes down to probability. A lot of the game of Survivor, and even more so with something like Big Brother, is probability. There are no guarantees, but you have to make the moves and make relationships that help increase your chance of making it to the end of the game and winning. If a move doesn't increase your chance of winning the game, then you made a bad move, and it is a knock against your game for me. Most of the time, voting with the majority and not making the big move is the best move, but you have to know when it is the right time to make the big move, and that's truly a determination on whether you're a good player or not. And that's, in essence, what this strategic game of Survivor really is, making the moves that increase your chances of winning the game. So if it doesn't do that, you fundamentally failed at the strategic game. So I think that's it. I think that's most of what I wanted to say here. I probably forgot some stuff here and there, but might do a future video expanding upon this. But again, for me, it comes down to the game of Survivor fundamentally being a social game, and a game where you have to make moves that better your chance of winning the game. The game is about getting to the end and winning, and the most probable way of doing that is by staying in the majority of the vote and not needing the use of immunity wins or idols, as those fundamentally add variance to the game that is just completely unnecessary. So that's basically my philosophy on the game. I mean, I just wanted to do a individual video like this to fully explain my rationale for the way I look at the game, and here you go. Obviously, stay tuned for more Survivor, Big Brother, video game, anything videos in the future, but for now, thank you for watching.